مصلحا ومجددا فارنوا بنظر طاهر وجناني.
Assalamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, dear brothers. With us today is our beloved brother Mirko from Italy, who has accepted Islam Ahmadiyya. And today we are blessed to have him with us, and we will hear his story and his journey of how he accepted the true Islam. So, brother, our first question for you is, what is your name and background?
First of all, Assalamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. As you said, my name is Mirko, and I'm originally from Sicily, in Italy, but I live in Iceland now. I've been living in Iceland for almost 7 years already. And well, my background, my parents are Catholic. I was raised as a Catholic. And, you know, this is just the norm, actually, in Italy. Many families are Catholic, but many are not practicing. And my parents as well, and not practicing. Well, you know, it is typical actually in Italian families, you know, focusing somehow on the Catholic tradition. I mean, baptism, other sacraments, and then getting, you know, the so-called confirmation, and then disappearing actually completely from churches until the moment of marriage. This is something that happens typically, well, but this is also, you know, this is the trend still today, like that.
Okay, brother. So, how did you come to Ahmadiyya, being someone from Italy, accepting the Imam Mahdi and Messiah, who claimed to be the Latter-day Messiah in Guardian in India, which is a miracle in itself? So, how did you find Islam Ahmadiyya?
That's a complex story, actually. It's a little bit complicated, even though, I mean, I don't know how impressive that is, but it has been a long journey because I moved from, you know, from Christianity to atheism to Islamic Ahmadiyya. And I actually accepted Islam here in Iceland, not in Italy. So it was after I came here. So, okay, if I focus on that, I mean, on accepting Islamic Ahmadiyya, well, this happened more or less in 2015, 16. It was actually the time, you know, when, you know, there was a huge discussion about the electoral campaign in the United States, Trump versus Clinton. And there was a huge discussion about Islam and Muslims. We all know that. And, you know, at the time, I had already started teaching, if I'm not wrong. And, you know, some of my students were actually Muslims. If I'm not wrong, they were all Shia Muslims. And we started having some conversation about Islam as well. And, you know, the experience that I had was, you know, these students were kind, hardworking. You know, I'd never had any problem with them. And, you know, at that point, I saw two different narratives because on one hand, of course, there was what Trump was saying, for example, against Muslims and Islam. And then on the other hand, there were, you know, my students who behaved in a different way. So, of course, okay, what is the right narrative? You know, because at that point you have some questions about that. So I decided to go back to the roots and read the Holy Quran by myself. And, you know, I got an Italian translation, but I also could read Arabic already because, you know, I started studying Arabic on my own when I was 13 years old. Sort of, I admit that I'm a language nerd, I know. With that knowledge that I had already, especially about Arabic grammar, then I took a look at both texts, so the Arabic text and the translation. And you see, at the time when I had already moved to Iceland, you know, and I was atheist at the time, I started traveling around Iceland. And, you know, I started questioning somehow, you know, this thoughts that I had, you know, that there was no God, that there was just, you know, everything was just chaotic. Taking a look at, you know, how the Islamic landscape is, you know, the beauty of it, you know, northern lights and then waterfalls, this, you know, piqued somehow my curiosity, and I started, you know, thinking about, okay, what if a God really exists? What if there is a designer? And I started thinking also the possible attributes of this God. And, you know, one of the first things that I started thinking was, oh, well, I mean, you know, from a Christian mindset, I thought that God needed us somehow. Also because he, you know, I believed when I was a Christian that he assigned us a mission, in particular, every one of us, as if we were like all special. But then, you know, I started thinking, well, I mean, we are the expression, of course, of God's creative powers, but doesn't necessarily mean that he needs us. It sounds more to me, you know, this is my thought at the time, that actually God is self-sufficient. I mean, he doesn't need us, but he can create us anyway. So I had already, thought something that was already one of the principles of Islam, that God is self-sufficient. And when I started reading the Holy Quran, I had, these thoughts were confirmed. So, so there is already a book that has similar ideas. And, by reading it, I started feeling more attracted to it, and also in relation to the commandments that were there, respect for parents, for example. And this is something where I admit it, I lacked a lot, because I hadn't a good relationship with my parents before I converted to Islam. And, we generally started arguing, especially with my mother. And, we always ended up, badly, I mean, verbally, at least. And, this made me think, because of course, what we have around us is also, the product of, the mercy of God. So even, having a family and having certain people around us, this is also, they're just tiny bits here and there of this mercy. So I started, looking at my parents in a different way. And, so with time, I started, thinking, okay, what if I became a Muslim? What if I accepted Islam? And, at a certain point, I felt really inclined. But of course, there was the big question, what community? And of course, I didn't know anything about Ahmadiyya at the time, at all. I didn't even know it existed. So, of course, I started thinking, okay, the main communities are Sunni and Shia communities, and of course, there are different schools of thought behind, this umbrella name, Sunni on one hand and Shia on the other. But there were, while reading the Quran, there were some principles, that belong to Sunni and Shia Islam that, I didn't find in the Quran. And the first thing, first thing that comes to mind is death for apostasy. I mean, when I was reading the Quran, there was nothing that pointed to that, because the problem actually comes from the ahadith. So I said, okay, if Sunni Islam and Shia Islam approves this, that someone has to be killed because he or she leaves Islam, to me, it's simply unfair, because it denies the freedom of a person. So, and this is, this was, crucial to me. If a certain, set of rules, let's say, or a dogmatic system allows this, this is not something that I can accept. Absolutely not. And the problem is, regarding ahadith, actually, because there are, of course, some ahadith, 7 or 8, if I'm not wrong, where it is said that whoever leaves the deen has to be killed. But, you know, while I was thinking about that, I had a thought in mind, you know, that, I mean, why are ahadith untouchable in that sense? Because, you know, I have the feeling when I see, for example, Sunni Muslims discussing about Islam, I feel that there are too many untouchables. So, of course, the Quran on one hand, but that's for all Muslims, of course. But the ahadith, you know, there is one point that to me was actually important. And it is, of course, we know that Muhammad Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, all the collectors of ahadith had an intention, which is collecting as much information as possible about the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And this is absolutely, you know, this is a pious intention. And they also applied a methodology and set some criteria in order to evaluate whether some hadiths were authentic or not. But does this, you know, do the intentions and also this methodology guarantee 100% that they got everything right? And if they didn't, why do we have to stick to these judgments, you know, authentic or not authentic, based on the fact that someone else gave that judgment? You know, with the risk actually that these ahadiths were probably, you know, not 100% accurate or even less than 100%. So at that point, you know, I said, okay, there is something that doesn't hold water. There is a problem in this. Okay. So the first thing I thought actually was some sort of, I think it's exactly the same response that Quranists have given. You know, okay, there are some issues with ahadith, so let's reject them completely. But even then, that's also an extreme move, because at that point, you know, there is also, you know, something important. There is good information that we can, you know, take from the ahadith as well. So moving on the opposite edge is probably too much. And while I was thinking about all this, then I was on Twitter, and I saw all of a sudden, you know, a tweet that pointed to the True Islam campaign in the United States. And I said, okay, what is this? And I went to the website, and finally I found, you know, that those principles that I thought were consistent with Islam and the Holy Quran, they came up exactly in the website. So I said, okay, this makes sense to me. And, you know, the one who wrote, you know, this tweet was actually Qasim Rashid. And so I started following him, and I got to know about the existence of the Ahmadiyya community. So at that point, I started, you know, visiting the website, and I saw that there were so many texts actually. And then I came, you know, I see, okay, there is also this concept of the Messiah that I didn't know about at all at the time. So I had only one, you know, the first big question mark when I saw, you know, when I saw the website. Okay, there are so many texts. Doesn't it make Islam more complicated? Because, of course, to me, I wanted to find something that made sense, but there was also simple, you know, that where its principles were simple. So I had the feeling, okay, there could be much more involved with all this quantity of, you know, all this amount of texts that were there. So what happened is actually that, you know, I got to know that there was a Murabbi Sahib here in Iceland, and I actually got to know that we had a friend in common with him. So at a certain point, you know, I was just going downtown in Reykjavik, and at a certain point, I walked, you know, in the flea market where the bookstall is, and I saw, you know, I knew who this person was, but I had never met him in person. That was the first time. So I walked past and I was like, okay, let me see. Probably, it must have been him. So I went again back and, you know, I started talking to him. And, you know, we started immediately, you know, our conversation. And, you know, we started talking about religion, and he invited me also, you know, to have a conversation at, you know, at the mission house. And then little by little, I felt, you know, more attracted to, you know, Islam Ahmadiyya. But I needed to know more. So Murabi Saib actually, you know, advised me to read some texts, like an introduction to the Holy Quran and other texts as well, the philosophy and the teachings of Islam. And while reading them, I felt, okay, yeah, when this principle and also this thing and also this one, they were exactly what I thought, you know, even before I got to know about Ahmadiyyat. So it actually makes sense. So so that at that point, really, I felt like, okay, this is it. You know, we are there. This is probably the right direction. And, you know, at that point, I felt that I just needed one more push, and then it would have been fine. And, you know, this push was a little bit strange, if I can call it like that, because, you know, at the time, that has been a big issue, actually, here in Iceland, because of, you know, there was some news of an Icelander that I knew indirectly somehow, but not in person. But we had some relations, you know, some acquaintances in common, and this Icelander, he had gone to Syria, and, you know, at a certain point there was some news that popped up that he had been killed. So this man actually had, you know, very strong ideals regarding, you know, they had this idea that he had to fight in order to free Syria. So he wanted to go there, and no one could stop him, even at the risk of, you know, he wanted to sacrifice his life anyway. So what happened is that, you know, there has been a discussion with these friends of mine about him. And at first I thought that probably has been, you know, probably silly. At the time, was the first thing that came to my mind, that it was probably a silly move, because it, you know, the people around me that knew him were, you know, so sad, especially one in particular, like she was devastated regarding this whole situation. And I started thinking about it, you know, and I stopped at a certain point and I said, but what if, you know, he had an ideal anyway, you know, he wanted to fight in order to free Syria. So is there any possibility that probably what he did wasn't so silly? And, you know, a few days later, it was Friday. And, you know, I had already started, you know, watching the Friday sermon together, you know, with Murabi Sahib, you know, at the mission house. And while going there, because at the time I didn't have a car and I went there on foot, you know, while I was walking there, I thought, okay, once in our you know, discussions, Murabi Sahib told me, it happened a lot of times to me that, you know, there was something, you know, that was reflecting upon during the entire week. And then during Huzur sermon, the same topic came up, and that helped me a lot in order to, you know, to understand what to do. And I said, okay, if Huzur's sermon today tells me something about, a similar topic, or something that makes me, understand, the sacrifice of this man, then okay, I'm willing to join the community. So I went to the mission house, and it was, the sermon was about the Sahaba, and the topic exactly was, sacrificing one's life for the sake of Islam. I remember, as soon as Huzur started talking about this, like exactly this topic, I don't know, I started blushing. My face was red, and like, I don't know, it felt like I had a fever or something all of a sudden. And at that point, okay, the time has come. At this point, there is nothing else we could do. So at the end of the sermon, then I looked at Rabbi said, could you please print those papers for me? And that was quite unexpected, because he didn't know anything about that. And then that's when I joined Ahmadiyya. So it has been, that was a little push, but yeah, I mean, I don't know how to explain that, but it had so much impact on me, actually. And also the consequences of, joining the community, because with my parents, there has been a huge change, really. At a certain point, I had to tell them that I had converted to Islam. And considering, how my parents react, because we, Sicilians are dramatic. Every single Sicilian is reacts a lot to things. And knowing this, and knowing that my parents would have, would have had a negative reaction, and also knowing that they wouldn't have listened to my reasons, then I wrote them instead. And they had time also, to think about it, and, and accept it slowly, because otherwise it would have been too much of a shock if I had, if I had shown up in Sicily and started praying 5 times a day, and it would have been too much of a shock for them. So I started, I wrote them, and then they started asking me, but they were, of course, very concerned, very worried. So yeah, because of course the material that they have, the information that they have about Islam is, of course, what comes from the media. So what can you do at that point? So I knew that they needed time in order to see that everything was fine. So after some months, I came back to Sicily, and everything was fine with them. So they understood that there was nothing to be worried about. And now, for example, we have, a stronger relationship, and we, I call them, more often, just to see, also to see how they are, and especially now, considering, this whole issue with the coronavirus, because my parents are old, so I'm also worried about them. And for now, I mean, there has been a long lockdown in Italy, but now it is possible to go out, even if my parents are still very frightened, and they try to reduce at, the minimum possible, going out, even if it is, to the grocery store. But yeah, compared to how the situation was before, definitely yes. It's also because, at a certain point, I started detaching myself from my parents. I was 18 at the time when that happened. And, interestingly enough, when I was a Catholic, I had the intention of becoming a Franciscan friar, and probably also a priest as well later on. So my parents actually didn't accept this either. So they didn't want me to become a priest. No, it's a no from us. But anyway, I was steadfast at the time. I wanted to do that. The problem is, that we had a huge discussion because of this. And, in this discussion, my parents told me things that made me feel, unwanted, as if, my parents were ashamed of my decision, even if I considered that noble. So at the point I started detaching myself from my parents. And this, decision, had a huge impact on my life, because from that point, I started, avoiding as much as possible to talk to my parents for years. And also when I came to Iceland, it was exactly the same thing. And even, sometime before, I started reading the Holy Quran, definitely, yes. It was just distance, because I felt hurt and I didn't want that to happen again. So it was just, some sort of defense measure. But now it's completely different. So actually, Islam has changed a lot, how the situation is. And another thing that changed is actually, another thing that is very linked to Italian culture and Sicilian culture, which is, being physical, touching people, so hugs, kisses. I mean, in Italy, there is this habit, of kissing people, even after, like at the second meeting already. So first time is just shaking hands, but second time is already, kissing each other on both cheeks. So, when I converted to Islam, I started, decreasing these things, especially with women, of course. So it was a habit that I had to, eradicate, for the most part. It was difficult at first because it's so, automatic. It's part of our culture. So it's somehow, it was somehow difficult. Now it's better. And it's also, it's also good for me for a simple reason, because I focus so much on, on these acts actually, because whenever someone didn't want to, engage in, such physical contact, that made me feel, disappointed, or anyway, okay, it made me wonder why. But now, I'm seeing a relationship with another person and under, from a different perspective, because it's not, the physical contact that matters, but actually, the dialogue, the ideas, and also, the values that are transmitted to each other. So I have, I think I have more respect for people now, and, who they are, now that I, focus more on talking to someone else, even if there is distance between us. So somehow, Islam helped me a lot in different aspects of life. Also because at that point, if you renounce to, this physical contact with everyone, which is of the same type. So if it is of the same type, you don't differentiate between people. You don't, you see everyone like, good friends, when actually the reality is that some of them are very close to you and some of them are less close to you, which is the natural, it's a natural thing in a society. And, Islam helped me also to appreciate this, that there are some people who are, closer to you, of course, and there are people who are less close to you. And there is the need to recognize that as well. So this helped me a lot, yeah, to understand, how to behave in a society. And I also, took my time to understand also other controversial issues, for example. And one of the things, that I thought about also while I was, considering the idea of becoming a Muslim was, for example, the issue of hijab, which is one of the typical ones that comes up, also with huzur. This is one of, it comes a lot of times in interviews. Sounds like people don't watch them in order to be prepared. But anyway, but it's good that huzur is patient anyway. So I was, regarding the hijab, there was something, very significant to me, because, I have the feeling that, the hijab for men, for example, restraining one's gaze, not looking at women, this is actually, a difficult thing to do, and it sounds more difficult, for example, than the hijab of women. So, because it's a behavioral thing rather than, wearing something. And why is that? I mean, while I was thinking about this, why is that? Because, of course, men are often the problem. One of the things that I've seen, also in Italian society, I have followed, for example, various conversations, also on Twitter and on other social media, regarding the fact that men tend to, invade the space of women also on the streets, and not only in Italy, but also in other parts of the world, doing compliments or catcalling or whatever it is. That's not good. I mean, because you are invading the space of another person, you don't know that person. And, those compliments are not requested. That catcalling is not requested. So why are you doing these things, And women are complaining about this. Why are you doing this? We don't like that. And then there are some comments from men that say something like, well, but that's a compliment. I mean, come on. I'm not insulting you. I'm not offending you. They just don't get, that women want, their space, their privacy. So so because of this, to me, actually, while I was thinking, reflecting upon, the teachings of Islam, this whole situation made me think that's a good solution from both sides, because, if men don't look at women, don't stare at women, don't approach them, then of course these dynamics don't come up. And there is also another thing. It's actually more of a responsibility. This is also, one thing that Islam taught me. As a man, I have a responsibility both towards men and towards women, so that no one gets in trouble because of me. No one is hurt because of me, because of my words, because of my actions. So also not looking at women is a responsibility, So if I don't look at them, I'm actually protecting them, and I don't making them feeling uncomfortable because of me. So, that made me think a lot, how should I move in the society in such a way that no one feels hurt because of me, And that, of course, pushes you into being kind and compassionate to other people. Because, if you follow this reasoning, it's easy then to put yourself in the mindset that, okay, if I do a certain thing, it can be problematic for other people, so I don't do it. So that was really, really helpful, thinking about this, because the Quran challenged me. Islam challenged me from the very beginning. So thinking about these things also, helped me to turn around my thought completely and having a different perspective about things. Because, regarding the hijab, before actually I started, reading the Quran, I wasn't 100% convinced that it was a good solution or something that really was worth it. But now I see it completely different. So Islam, I mean, I've been member of this community for 2 years already, and yeah, different things have changed. Of course, it's a work in progress. I don't say that I already arrived at a certain point. No, this is just the beginning, of course. So I still have to work on different things. But yeah, it helped me a lot. Alhamdulillah, definitely, yes.
Alhamdulillah, mashallah, that was really inspiring. So one question I have for you is that you explained how Ahmadiyya changed your life in many aspects. The next question is, I've seen you at Jalsa United Kingdom, right? 1 year. So how was your experience there, and what's your feelings about the importance of Khilafat? If you can explain that to the viewers.
Well, first of all, okay, regarding Jalsa, yeah, that was my first experience when I saw you for the first time. I didn't know actually what to expect. I have to be honest, because okay, new experience, I don't know what will happen. But the first thing that I can tell you, that was the feeling of being a huge family, as if we were like, okay, we are all brothers and sisters. We are part of, we were like one big family. And, it was such a strange feeling, because it was like, I felt, connected to all the people that were around me, even if I didn't know them. So it was difficult to describe. Sometimes when it's about these events, I don't have the words to describe them correctly. But, I felt, more at every time I go to Jalsa, for now it has been twice. In both times I felt like this connection actually also to Huzur as well. We are part of our community, and we are, we all look at Huzur as someone who gives guidance to us, and that is important, especially because, in Islam, there are so, mainstream Islam, I'm saying, there are so many schools of thought, so many. When I was looking at all these names, Hanafi, Shafi, Hanbali, Maliki, and all the other groups, I felt like, okay, but does this really unite us? Because at that point, if there are so many schools of thought, where is the guidance? That's the first thing that comes to my mind. Where is the guidance if there are leaders here who think, this way, and other leaders there who think another way? Where do I get, this guidance? Because I want, I mean, living, for example, Islam alone, let's say, it's also difficult because, it's difficult because where is the guidance also when you are alone as well? So, it cannot work like that. There must be a leadership. Because the question is, what if, for example, even in the Ummah, at the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, what if the Ummah had multiple leaders, giving guidance about certain things that couldn't help, of course, the entire community, because there could be some disagreement, for example, about the various leaders of the community. So the only solution is having exactly one leadership, someone who's rightly guided and who, is able to give guidance and give advice to the community in their aspects of life. And also because it happens, it's human that there is, some sort of, that some concepts are somehow modified or interpreted differently. This is typical everywhere. And I'm not talking about religions only. I'm talking about, for example, political views, political ideologies, because every time there is someone who brings a new idea, like the Holy Prophet ﷺ, or even other people who changed history, bringing a certain message. That person, that individual, maintains the integrity of that message. And of course is able to give guidance and advice by virtue of that message. So if that person is not there anymore after the message has been delivered, the idea has been delivered, what happens is that this is absolutely normal, that there is disagreement about certain things that were not properly discussed. And that leads to separation. And something that can solve this is keeping the leadership, so that, these phenomena where, some interpretations start changing here and there, at least can be still kept together, by someone who can still give advice, who has the authority to give advice. So this is one of, the reason, but very abstract actually, where that tell us that Khilafat is important in this respect, because Islam is a way of life. So there must be someone, who gives advice. There must be someone who gives a consistent advice. Because if this advice is not consistent, this authority is lost. And there is no possibility, to be all together and understand the message in a, certain way. Because as soon as you have different voices, telling different things, it doesn't work. Because it leads to separation. It leads to, thinking, you believe differently than me, and so you are not part of what I belong to. So we are two different groups. And that there is some sort of fragmentation at that point in a certain community, which is, which destroys everything. That doesn't work. So one advice actually that, I know that there will be viewers watching this video. One advice that they give is, think about, Khilafat also from this perspective, because there must be a leadership. There must be a leader that helps us in understanding how we are supposed to, live our life as a Muslim. Because I'm not sure how, comfortable, for example, Muslims of other communities feel when they see that there are different, perspectives and interpretations about things. I would feel uncomfortable because, okay, if you say A and the other one says B, okay, what is the correct guidance? That's the first thing that comes to mind. So yeah, it is absolutely important. It is absolutely important to have guidance. Definitely is.
Jazakallah, dear brother. So in the end, if you want to give any message to those Muslims who have not accepted the promised Messiah alayhi salam, and to those Christians who should also accept the promised Messiah alayhi salam, then you can give them that message, and also any books of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community which you would recommend the non-Muslims and non-Ahmadis to read.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, okay, as I come from a Christian background, I have to, I can, talk about my experience actually as, when I was a Christian, and now how I see it, after a long time, because there have been, one thing, if I may, is regarding Jesus alayhi salam in Christianity. One of the things that I thought, when I converted to Islam, and I looked back, at what I believed as a Christian. One thing is, wait a minute, why should someone sacrifice himself for me and other people? Because, I want to be responsible for what I do. Why should someone else be punished or suffer because of something that I do? because there is this concept, of course, of, the sacrifice of Jesus for everyone, to me, it doesn't make any sense, because I don't want other people to sacrifice because of me or because of what I did. There is no need to do that. I don't find it fair, actually. There is no fairness in letting someone be sacrificed. Someone, of course, Christians would definitely say, but this is a sacrifice made with love for the sake of, everyone. Yes, and what is the result of that? The result is simply that we are not pushed in being better people. This is the result, because I didn't feel pushed into becoming a better person, because of course Jesus has already sacrificed himself for my sins. So what's the point, of developing virtue, of becoming, a better person, if someone has already sacrificed himself for me? There is no need to. There is nothing that pushes you into becoming a better person. This is one important thing. So, of course, also regarding the Trinity, of course, that is problematic for me as well, because to me it sounds like, okay, one consciousness, but three consciousnesses together, where, one part of the consciousness doesn't know some things that another part of the consciousness knows. To me, it can be quite problematic. And also, considering also what the Prophet Messiah ﷺ says in Jesus in India, this is actually helpful to understand, what exactly happened. Yeah, because there, as I said, there are elements here and there that clearly show that this idea of Jesus that is raised to heaven, this is something, that sounds more like a fairy tale, based also on the data that you see here and there, some also technical information, like, for example, in the Gospel of John, where it is said, that Nicodemus and also Joseph or Arimathea take, the body of Jesus with, aloe and myrrh, which are actually medical herbs. So why would you use these herbs on a corpse, provided that this person is already dead? So there are some problems here and there. So to Christians, at least, I would advise to read Jesus in India. And not only that, but also another book, which is Way of the Seekers, of the Second Khilafat. For a simple reason, as a Christian, if I put myself into the Christian mindset, there is one thing actually that contrasts with what Way of the Seekers says. And that was something that was actually interesting to me, because I've always felt this idea as a Christian, that I had to avoid committing sins. And as soon as I committed them, then the sacrament of confession can, remove them. But that's a negative side of the religion, because you're not developing virtue by doing that. You're simply removing your sins and that's it. You're not becoming a better person. You're not focusing on the positive side, which is developing virtue. You're simply trying to maintain your integrity without changing. And this is a typical mindset actually of Christianity, So, and I live that, I admit it, when I was a Christian, I also, followed this kind of mindset. So I would say that also Way of the Seekers, can be important for, for a Christian to read, because it focuses a lot on the positive side of the religion, especially regarding, developing virtue. So definitely, yes. Regarding Muslims instead, well, that's a more difficult issue, actually. That's a more difficult issue. Because, of course, that's, there is a huge debate. Jesus as the Messiah that is still living, for 2000 years, and he will come back, and, based on the Sunni and Shia narrative. But, I don't know exactly what could be helpful exactly for them in order to let them understand clearly, hey, this is, your narrative has some problems. I wouldn't exactly point one book, but personally, one thing in relation to this concept of the promised Messiah is, I personally, I accepted Islam and Ahmadiyya, so as an Ahmadi Muslim, I cannot accept this possibility that Jesus is still alive, 2,000 years, potentially immortal. But I cannot accept it either as a linguist, because the Quran is clear about this. The Quran is clear. There is no possibility to be mistaken, especially for those people who know Arabic grammar. There is no possibility to be mistaken about this. Because you see, as a linguist, especially, I'm very focused on syntax. We work a lot with contrasts. When there are two examples where there is something different based on, a specific feature that changes here and there, and we try to understand why there is this contrast. Now, as Muslims, we all believe that the Quran is the word of God. And if there is, a contrast between two different points of the Quran, let's say also from a grammatical perspective, there must be a reason behind this, and there must be wisdom behind this difference, behind this contrast. So, generally, and this is, I know you point this verse, you pointed out in different debates, which is verse 145 of Surah number 3, regarding, the beginning of that. Ma Muhammadun illa rasulun qad khalat min qablihi rusul. Now, to me, my focus generally, when I think about it, is not on the verb khalat. It is actually on the article before rusul. And why? Because there are constructions like these in the Quran where instead of the definite article, there is a tanween. Like in verse 31 of Surah number 13, there is a fragment which says, قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهَا أُمَمٌ, when you have the tanween. So if in the same construction you have two different nouns, both plural and both countable, which have two different grammatical features, one definite article, the other tanween, there must be, a difference, a conceptual difference between them. Now, generally, this is what is generally said about the tanween with plural nouns. They express partitiveness. So some communities or some nations, where you have umamun, right? So, and it actually makes sense because, of course, at the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, there were still some communities alive while others had passed, right? So if the tanween there represents partitiveness, so some communities, it's not possible to say for ar-rusul, some messengers. There must be a different idea. It cannot be the same. So one interesting thing is actually that, definite articles in many languages with plural nouns have the same effect. They have the effect of totality. And this happens in Italian, it happens in French, in Spanish, in English as well, in, many languages. And Arabic is not an exception, especially because you have, min qablihi, which makes a subset of messengers. Especially in that situation, the idea is definitely totality. So actually saying the messengers and all messengers has the same effect. So it is not contradictory and it's not a novelty to put all messengers instead of the messengers in a translation of the Holy Quran. However, a Sunni Muslim or a Shia Muslim can move the objection by saying, hey, wait a minute. The English translation, you say English translation, okay, English has a definite article. So why don't you use the definite article there and you use all? There is a logical, explanation to this, because the first translation of our community was in Urdu, and Urdu does not have a definite article, right? So what happens then? When it was translated, of course, and that was the first translation, that was a model of translation. So the translators that came after and started, working on further translations into English, French, Spanish, and so on, they were most probably Urdu speakers, right? So they used the Urdu translation as a model in order to, create a new translation. So actually it's a sort of translation bias, having, all messengers also in other translations. But what matters is that the Urdu translation itself, which worked as a model, why is all messengers there? Because there is no definite article. So how do you express totality? You cannot do that unless you use a quantifier. So you use all in that sense. So it actually makes completely sense to me to have this idea. I mean, just because all messengers and the messengers have the same result. So to me, there is actually no difference between the two. If we consider, what the result is semantically, it's exactly the same. So that's why I am saying also as a linguist, I cannot accept, this possibility that Jesus is still alive, alayhi salam. Also because having this idea that not all messengers have passed away opens the way to ambiguity in such a way that, it becomes more difficult to have a clear idea. Also because, there is also another verse, which is verse 76 of Surah number 5, where instead of having exactly the same structure, first fragment of verse 145 of Surah number 3, exactly the same structure, but the name changes. So it's the name of Jesus, alayhi salam. So if one claims that there is someone before the Holy Prophet ﷺ who's still alive, then there is also someone else before Prophet Jesus ﷺ who's still alive. So at least two messengers are alive. So especially regarding the idea, that there is in Sunni Islam, that there is, the Messiah Mahdi are the same person, and it's only one. Now, where is, okay, what about this second messenger, that comes out of this interpretation? What is his role at this point, if there is the idea that there is only one? And not only, because saying not all doesn't necessarily mean that there is only one or two, there can be even more. So it opens the way, for ambiguity in such a way that really, it is impossible, to keep everything together, because at a certain point, the system collapses. There is a contradiction at a certain point that doesn't hold water. So it is difficult anyway for me, to point specifically, if I refer to, some books of our community or the Prophet Messiah ﷺ regarding, a specific point, because, conceptually, Sunni Muslims generally tend to reject, whatever concept is there. But, I can put anyway my experience as a linguist in taking a look at these things. And, that's why I'm saying also, my perception of this is, as a linguist, actually is consistent with, the interpretation of our community. So this is also, linguistics itself, I mean, they also confirmed what we believe. So I don't know if this can be helpful for them. It's just something that can sound technical, but to me, it actually makes sense anyway.
Jazakallah, brother, really inspiring. One thing that came to mind when hearing you speak on this verse is that all the commentators of Islam from day one till now, the classical commentators, when they would commentate on this verse, they would never say anyone's excluded in ar-rusul, right? Even though many of them believed Isa was alive, they couldn't write it there because they knew that it includes them all, and they had no explanation to this verse, and many changed their view because of this verse. So Jazakallah, dear brother, for your time. I really enjoyed that, and I pray that others also benefit like I did. And in the end, we pray that Allah guides everyone to the true Islam Ahmadiyya. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah, brother.
If you have not yet subscribed, make sure to subscribe and click on the bell icon so you can get notifications for every new video. Also make sure to like and comment on the video and follow on Twitter and Instagram.
سيدنا صل على محمد